By 2012, the Masters of the Universe Classics line was riding high. We were on the outlook of doing a giant playset, which we successfully did, and growing the line by leaps and bounds, adding bonus subscriptions, extra convention figures, all sorts of additional SKUs here and there. But this also represented a problem because, well, we basically had a He-Man problem. While we were so deep into the line, we were looking at the future, meaning, 3, 4, 5 years ahead, where we could go, and realizing that, well, we were kind of running out of characters in the long term. I mean, yes, with the acquisition of being able to do Filmation characters, this was opening up a lot of libraries, but figures that were in the vintage line absolutely sold the best. Like, no question about it. It was, like 5, 10 times better than any other figure. And while we were doing figures from other factions, things like the New Adventures He-Man, which was set in outer space with all the mutants, or even Princess of Power, which was the doll line that was done with She-Ra back in the 80s, doing her now as an action figure line, still, these didn't sell as well as the vintage figures that were actually in MOTUC. Well, except for maybe She-Ra. She was the only exception. And while we were creating new characters with programs like the Fan Create a Character contest, as well as giving fans the ability to vote on characters that they wanted to see in the line, we were still, for the most part, we were out of the main characters. And we knew that to keep the line going long term, we were going to need to think about ways to infuse new characters into the line, outside of the obscure Filmation ones. So, we had really burned through even the main variants of the main characters at this point, or at least we had them plotted out, and our basket was looking a little empty as far as 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ahead. We didn't know how long the line could go, but we wanted to try to use every tool in our arsenal to ensure it could go for potentially decades. Granted, it, kind of cut off at 2016, 2017, but at the time, in 2012, we were really thinking long term. And since we had now access to do mini comics, because we had a little bit of a budget, in 2012 it was a gift, and the years after that we were able to do one mini comic a year using all of our non-media, as opposed to 2012 when we had that gift to do 3 for the 30th anniversary. Well, besides telling cool stories and linking different areas of the mythos together, we wanted to use these mini comics as a tool to introduce new heroes and villains, new characters. Whether or not they were going to wind up as toys was almost irrelevant, but if we at least introduced them in the mini-comics and set them up design-wise to be toys, we were at least going to be what's called set up for success, meaning once we were doing obscure Filmation characters, at least we had something else to pull from. Well, very luckily for the brand, for the fans, for me personally, I was able to meet Axel Gimenez. Axel is a very, very talented artist. He lives in South America, and I first connected with him when he sent me some artwork of a character I created, Mighty Spector, and what better way to get the brand manager to notice you than by sending some original art with a character he made, and obviously I was very impressed. Well, Axel is an incredibly talented artist, but I was amazed how strongly Masters of the Universe was with him. So I took it upon myself to bring him in as the artist on the mini-comics. Okay, I'm purposely trying to get this to work as a Star Wars quote, and it's totally not working. The point is, after Wellington was not available for mini-comics beyond issues 1 through 3, and I was asked to bring in another artist, I immediately said, well, we should get Axel, because he really understands MOTUC, and he's really great at putting in those Easter eggs in the design, like the way he slipped in Lubick here, as the guy welcoming He-Man back to Eternia, even though it's not actually called out as him. So a lot of new characters were sort of thrown into the background, both in the Wellington issues and in Axel's issues. Wellington did issues 1 through 3, Axel did 4 through 8. So one of the characters from King Grayskull's band there that you saw in the background, only his face was there, was Gladiator. And Axel used shared parts and his knowledge of Masters of the Universe classics and which parts were available to flesh out what his whole body could look like if he was potentially going to be a toy. The same thing with Beast Lord, another character in King Grayskull's Masters that was in that group shot, but you just saw his head. And this character was created to show that, Beast Man was part of a race and that sometimes his race did fight for good. They weren't all evil like the way Beast Man is. So you can see King Grayskull's band now gathered around Hero's coffin in the final page of the third mini-comic. Beast Lord down there on the bottom left, and then there's a few other characters just sort of dropped in there. And one of them was Red Shadow, who I mentioned had a very sort of a sad life because he had this mask permanently attached to his face, inspired by the Man in the Iron Mask, the historical character and the fictional character by Dumas. I'm a big fan of Dumas's work. And a lot of fans were asking, well, what do you mean his sad life? So that's why we came up with this design. Another one you see there at the bottom was Bandwidth, who you again only saw the back of his cape and his head. And when fans were asking, well, who is that character? I immediately said, oh, his name is Bandwidth. And that actually just became a joke because I didn't have the bandwidth to come up with a full name and background at the time. And that was always the excuse I got from a lot of other people who I'd ask favors for, and they would say, oh, I can't help you. I don't have the bandwidth. So he got inserted into the mini-comics again at the very end, where you got to see his whole body, now based on Axel's work. The giant battle at the end of mini-comic 3 that Wellington did, we also dropped in some extra characters, again, just kind of throwing them in the background, but immediately fans zoned in on them and would circle them online and say, well, who is this? Who's this guy way in the background here? And kind of like with the bandwidth joke, I was like, all right, well, we're going to have to make up whole storylines for all these characters here. So you can see a few of them in this shot: the Great Black Wizard, Stretchneck, Fangor. The Great Black Wizard, in particular, was a character that we used in the bios literally as a Deus Ex Machina. Whenever we needed some kind of force to come in and change something, we used this character. That's what he was there for, just sort of as a story element. But of course, fans wanted to know what he looked like, and Axel took it upon to design him and flesh him out. The same with Stretchneck, who you could see in that battle scene in kind of the back right spot behind some other Snake Men, and he used the original design of Whiplash in the color scheme. Fangor was another character. While you didn't see his fangs in the battle shot, I wanted to have him work as an action feature, and the idea was that his fangs would protrude out of his mouth if he was a figure in the vintage line. Whenever I was creating a character, I always thought, what could their action feature be if they were in the vintage line? Because Classics was meant to be an update of that. And lo and behold, Fangor actually got made as a figure by Super 7 at the very tail end of the line, which blew me away because I got to co-create him with Axel and with Wellington. For all the slack I got about Mighty Spector and my design work on him, people really liked Fangor enough to request him as a figure. Later on in the mini-comics, there was a big battle on Tralla where two groups of very colorful warriors are having it out, and He-Man and Skeletor sort of walk into their battle when they're transported here. Well, eagle-eyed viewers will note that these characters are the runners-up from the modern fan contest and the vintage fan create-a-character contest, battling each other. So we wanted to insert even more characters into these teams, and one of them, I asked Axel to design a character that was based on Buster Crabbe, who played Flash Gordon in the 1930s. I wanted him to be in a spacesuit, because I love spacesuit characters from the 1930s, a la Marlena. Well, of course, Axel, taking it to the next level, said, well, I'm not going to design a spacesuit, let's just put him in the Castle Grayskull spacesuit. And I was like, genius, that is why you are so good at what you do, Axel. You always think of these things. So he put my Buster Crabbe character into the Castle Grayskull spacesuit, and there we go. You can see him there as the leader of the Protectors of Tralla, and there's two other characters to the right of him that were also new characters added. So one, I had asked Axel to essentially use the Ram Man body, because we always wanted to think about shared tooling parts that we had available when we were creating these characters, and do a cross between Ram Man and Gimli. The idea of doing a sort of a very big dwarf. Instead of a dwarf being a little guy, what if he was Ram Man sized? And that's where Hans Hammerholder came from. So Axel did a great job designing him based on that creative direction. Behind Skeletor to the right, if we were going to give the good guys new characters, we also wanted to give the bad guys a few more besides the contest winners. And you could see Muckman there. So my direction to Axel was to do a Cyclops head, because we had no characters in MOTUC that were Cyclops or had one head, and to very specifically use the Manny Face's body, not just for reuse of parts that were already available, but I wanted to use this figure to visibly establish that Manny Face was wearing a suit. So this suit could be worn by other people, just in a different color. So that was why he was put in Manny Face's suit, so that it could both be reused as far as parts and confirm that Manny Faces is in like an armor, and that's not his skin, if you will. And no, Muckman is not related to the Ninja Turtle Muckman, just coincidence. So in film school, go UCSB Gauchos, I was a big fan of Metropolis, Fritz Lang's film from the 30s, which introduced the concept of robots. Well, wasn't the first robot, but one of the first cinematic ones. So I really wanted to do a female robot in the MOTUC world, since we didn't really have any female robots. We had Roboto and the hover robots. So Axel, again, being very clever, used the body of Granita, who we hadn't done yet, but the idea was we wanted to get to her. So he modeled Robo Woman both after Mariah from Metropolis and Granita, so that she could be a repaint, or we could use the same parts for two different figures. The other figure you see there to the right was Crystal Man. Man Crystal was his name. He was kind of based off Silver Surfer there. Man Crystal, not Crystal Man, because that sounded too much like the drug, which I'm not going to mention. So that's why we inverted the name and made it Man Crystal. And he was going to have Stratos' staff, so again, we could reuse that later for Stratos. Turned out we got to make it anyway. So there you see Robo Woman making her screen or their page debut, and you could see Man Crystal and Jetpack and Hans Hammerholder. And there you see Man Crystal flying on his hover disc. So while he was kind of based on Silver Surfer, although he was made of crystal, he was also inspired by Crystar and the Crystal Warriors. And of course, Axel had the hover disc, which took the place of Silver Surfer's surfboard from the MOTUC movie, because again, Axel is a genius and thinks of all of these things and these details to make sure everything goes back. So you could see the giant battle between the fan-created character contest, vintage and new, augmented by a few new characters on each side to flesh out these factions using existing parts and shared parts so that they could potentially be new figures if we got to them. Alright, I like to keep my videos to about 12 to 15 minutes, so while there's still some Snake Man characters to talk about and a whole bunch of other designs Axel did, I'm going to save that for a part 2 of this video because he just does so many amazing designs, and there are so many characters that we couldn't have done in the mini-comics without Axel also thinking about how they would work as action figures. And that's really what he brought to the project so much, is not just his ability to design characters, but to think of how they would be in the MOTUC Classics line. I'm sad we never got the Spector Mobile, but, thanks for designing it, Axel. That was really fun, and I put that right on my my wall at Mattel. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll do a part 2 soon. Give me a subscription only because it tells YouTube to share this with more people, and that's the whole point, is to share toy fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.